Hello there. Welcome to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die. I'm Janice Fiamengo, and I'm joined by my good friends Paul Elam of paulelam.com and Tom Golden of MenAreGood. And we're going to do something a little different from what we normally do today. They're not that much different, but we had 3 different stories, articles, links that we wanted to discuss. And so we're going to go through them and talk briefly about each one of them in turn. And they all have to do, with our perennial subject, really, men's issues in relation to gynocentrism in our society, the way in which the focus is always on what's best for women, what women need, what men need to do for women. And I think even more particularly in these cases, the diversion of resources, the direction of resources from men towards women, which seems to be an imperative no matter what this particular subject is. So that's what we're going to talk about. We've got 3 articles. One of them was a short article in the New York Post by a woman named Elizabeth Rossner. And it was claiming that there is evidence that as a result of the lockdowns and of the general stresses of COVID-19, divorce rates are up. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, what that means for men, especially knowing as we do that divorce tends to be initiated by women. And in our societies, we tend to have made divorce very attractive for women and extremely harsh and punitive for men. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Then we're going to talk about the speech made by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which he gave to a series of women's groups, women's civil society groups, in which he basically, he makes the standard claim that COVID-19 has had a totally disproportionate impact on women, and that the response of the UN and all UN agencies, the response, of course, of the UN must be to create many resources for women, must make the aid to women and girls an absolute centerpiece in every way of UN efforts. And it is a remarkable document in which the fact, for instance, of men's much higher death rate is mentioned briefly in a subordinate clause of breathtaking indifference to male death, and goes immediately to a statement about how women's reproductive health has to be at the center of UN concern. In other words, I assume women's ability to abort their children is a much greater concern to the UN than the fact that men are dying and have died, and that as a result, resources have gone towards trying to help these dying men. I mean, it's just incredible. And there's many more lies and misrepresentations throughout that speech. And then we're going to end with something kind of completely different, but again, along the same lines of the way in which our society always wants to make sure that men's money goes towards women. And that's with a divorce ruling in Canada and in Ontario, a superior court, in which a man who was never married to this particular girlfriend, never lived with her, never had children with her, has yet been ordered to pay her lavish alimony. He is a very wealthy man, but simply by the fact that he had a girlfriend, he has been forced by an appeals court to pay her a whopping monthly alimony amount. And we'll tell you what the amount is and what it adds up to when we get to that story. So lots of interesting and disturbing things to talk about. So let's talk about the New York Post article first. Elizabeth Rossner tells us at the opening of this article that, quote, divorce rates have spiked in the US during the coronavirus pandemic as couples have been stuck at home for months. This isn't new. We've heard this. We've heard all these couples are stuck together, and this is causing all these problems, including, of course, a huge spike in domestic violence and tension and family breakdown and so on. And this article is spinning that wheel and actually, I think, relishing in the idea that that divorce is going up, the family is breaking down, women are getting out, women are recognizing that they can't take it anymore. And we're told that the number of people looking for divorces was 34% higher from March through June of this year, and that 31% of couples surveyed said the quarantine has been damaging to the relationship. Indeed. But when we first talked about this, you, Tom, looked into the evidence that was proffered, the links that were in that article, and found that actually one could tell a quite different story using the evidence available. But for some reason, this New York Post article wants to emphasize gloom and doom, wants to emphasize divorce.
You left out something, Janice. You said that with the COVID thing, divorces have increased, but you left out the last important part, which was women most affected.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's what the implication was of the whole thing. And they said, 31% said that quarantine had harmed their relationship, right? Yeah. So I went back and looked at the study that they quoted. And indeed, they did say that 31% said that the quarantine had harmed their relationship. But they also said 46% said it had helped the relationship. But they didn't tell you that part. Oh, well. So this is the kind of deception you get unless you look at the sources and you go and take the trouble to look at what's going on. There's a number of things in there that were pretty suspect. But with this kind of article, which is saying, women most affected, you're going to see this kind of distortion over and over again. I mean, they talked about the number of divorces of where they had children less than 18 had increased. There's an increase in the number of divorces of parents who had children under 18. And yes, if you look at the source, that's true. But the increase was 5%. 5%. Not a. It was. What's that?
I had to wonder about that too. First, I wondered what exactly represents a spike in divorce in a society where half of marriages are ending in a divorce to begin with. So what was the spike in that? And it turns out, what? How much, Tom?
Well, the 5% was the children under 18 piece.
Yes. I mean, we're talking about a bump on the radar that they're framing as a spike. And I think this also, unfortunately for women, and I'm gonna sort of defend women here for a moment.
No.
Part of the ongoing take him to the cleaners sort of narrative that we'll address later in our final story, and that's misleading too. One woman gets a stack of cash, but what happens, we know, in most divorces is that both parties end up poorer.
Yes.
Almost every time. And you know something? If you're worth $150 million, that doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, so you end up $75 million by the time you're done. But what happens in most divorces, and I've seen this over and over again, is that women get it in their minds. All right, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to take everything. And they don't calculate 2 mortgages. They don't calculate 2 electric bills, 2 of everything that comes in, and money that has to be split up. Because we find statistically after divorce that women are more likely to enter the poverty area than they are to go the other direction.
Yeah. And
they end up miserable, working awful jobs to try to make ends meet, having to put their children in daycare, that sort of thing. That's the post-divorce life for most women. And while I think the main focus of this story was about COVID, the subtext of all this to me is that we got more women entering more miserable lives, and it's bordering on being celebrated.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
And the men are also entering more miserable lives, but importantly, absolutely. So are the children. The children are losing both parents.
The wasn't the guy who wanted this stuff. Usually, because when couples stay together, guess what? They have more resources to combine.
Right.
And they live better lives. And it's not the guys that are filing most of the time. I think it's women who have an idea that I can just take half of his shit and earn a little bit on my own, and I'm going to be fine. And then they get into life post-divorce, and guess what they end up doing is looking for another husband because it doesn't work to their advantage.
Yes.
And then, of course, they're even more likely for that second divorce. there were for the first one.
Yeah, and that was what I really noticed about the article, that it never once expresses any kind of concern. You might say, well, this is just a news article, it's not supposed to. But if this were another kind of report about something that is to be deplored, or a sad situation, or a situation that doesn't work out well for people, there would at least, there'd be a quotation from an expert saying regrettably, and, or warning about the difficulties that this is going to cause both of the people who are going through the divorce, and talking about the harm to children or whatever. There's none of that here. There really is a kind of enthusiastic relishing of the fact. And it often is. I remember Steve Brule, our friend, telling us about, telling me about a time he had been somewhere at a conference or something, and a woman stood up and said, I just got a divorce. I was married for 25 years and I'm recently divorced. And the audience burst spontaneously into applause, like this was some wonderful thing that she had achieved, an act of heroic self-determination. And there's a bit of a flavor of that here too, that, that this is a good thing. Women aren't settling anymore, and and they're recognizing that they can strike out on their own, and isn't that good? And of course, we know that women do tend to be the ones who are convinced this is something that they should do. Women are the ones who initiate divorce in, I think, 70% or thereabouts cases, and they're often coached rather by their lawyers on how to do it. In ways that may seem advantageous to them and obviously are disadvantageous to their ex-husbands. I just heard recently from a lawyer who works in Canada, and he said that he was appalled at the number of cases where he knew that lawyers had counseled their female clients who wanted a divorce to initiate a fight to try to get their husband to either do something stupid, or at least, to get angry, so that they could say either he committed an act of violence, he threw something, he punched a wall, whatever it happens to be, it all counts as domestic violence and he can be charged with that, or that he threatened them or made them feel threatened. Certainly under Canadian law, even just feeling threatened is enough for the man to be charged and to be removed from the house. And so this is now the modus operandi in cases of acrimonious divorce, where the woman wants to get her husband out of the house. And so this lawyer, he walked me through it. He said that it's so distressing to see how easy it is. The man then is ejected from the home. He's charged with domestic violence. He then is not allowed back into the home, maybe for half an hour under supervision while he gathers a few of his clothes. Often he's then missing all sorts of necessary documents, papers, tax returns, evidence of his law degree or whatever it happens to be that he needs to get a job or to do whatever is necessary for him to pick up the pieces of his life. His wife won't let him back into the house. He has to continue paying the mortgage on that house that he's now no longer allowed to enter. The woman establishes residency. She establishes that she's the primary caregiver for the children. He's just exiled. It can take years for things to be worked out. In the meanwhile, his wife is alienating his children from him. He's, having to try to set up another home. Sometimes if she's been paying part of the mortgage, now she takes on a job so that she can be primary caregiver. And so he has to pay for 100% of the mortgage, whereas before he was paying 50 to 75%. I mean, it's just like it's a perfect storm for these guys who have this thing unleashed upon them. And it's really disturbing to think we live in a society that makes that possible and then presents articles like this, basically saying, go for it. If your relationship is under strain as a result of lockdown, well, just end it all.
Yep. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's what some men do during this whole alienating, abusive process.
That's it. Yeah.
That's why we see the difference in normal 4-to-1 suicide ratio between men and women goes up to 11-to-1 during the process of a divorce or a significant breakup.
Right.
That's not an accident, folks.
Yeah. I mean, it's so disturbing, and it's sure a weird, inefficient, patriarchal society that has that as a reality, and yet nobody doesn't even tell people about it. We never hear about that. in the normal course of affairs. If you're watching the television news and reading the normal channels where one gets one's information, one never knows about how suicide rates spike and how men are impacted by the encouragement to divorce of women in our societies. And yeah, it's really, really disturbing. And then when you come, now I'm going to transition us into the second article. When you come to read, unless there were other things you wanted to say, is that okay?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to add one more thing to that, just simply to play off of what you just said, Janice, is that yeah, we talk about this in real bizarre terms, and even on politically, on what you would think would be a more sympathetic side of the fence politically. I mean, I saw it wasn't 2 or 3 weeks ago, the subject of men's rights came up on the Greg Gutfeld show.
Oh, yeah.
And I watched it, and they were just mocking.
Yeah.
Everything. These are people that are supposedly more aware, more knowledgeable about the system and about injustices that come from the left. And there you got Greg Gutfeld and company sitting there mocking anybody who would want to do anything about this, saying they're a bunch of whiners.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really disappointing and
It sure is.
And depressing.
Yeah, it really is. And then when you turn to the second item we wanted to talk about, which is the UN Secretary General's speech, which he gave a few weeks ago to young women from civil society organizations group, whatever that means. And this speech will include the link, of course. It was published. And it's the script. It's what we could call the big lie, a lie that is so outrageous and so often repeated that a lot of us come to believe it must have some validity. It's all the usual stuff. He starts by saying that beyond the virus itself, the response to the virus has had a disproportionate and devastating social and economic impact on women and girls. And so he goes on, and we know all the things because we already saw all these as the standard script that started way back in March. As soon as the virus hit, we saw all those articles about how women are on the front lines. Supposedly, they're the ones that are taking the brunt of the work to try to save people's lives and nurse people.
Oh, imagine that. Imagine having that in your life. God, who else has the responsibility to face danger?
Yeah.
Save other people's lives? Is there another group that applies to?
No.
No. I was thinking it might be men for a second, but of course that's...
dies 93% on the job.
Yes.
From dangerous jobs.
Yeah.
Is that women?
No. No, I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, I really encourage everybody to read, if you can stomach it, read the whole speech.
Yeah. If you can stomach it. It really is something.
It's awful. And you could say, well, he's tailoring it for, these women's organizations. But it is awful. There is not a single mention of anything about men's contributions during the time of the pandemic. There's not a single word about working with men, supporting men, caring for men, men and women together. There's nothing. It's just all women are on the front lines. Women bear the burden of unpaid caregiving. And, we have to do something about that. Women bear the burden in terms of the spike in domestic violence. Of course, he has absolutely no evidence that there has been such a spike, but
it doesn't exist.
To refer to data.
He doesn't. Yeah, no, he doesn't. He doesn't try to at all. Just presenting it as if it were some kind of fact. Women make great leaders. That's come to our attention as well. And we need to push for more women leaders. We need to push for 50% parity of women in leadership roles. So, sorry, Paul.
We got Trudeau and Canada. What do you know?
Yeah.
Who needs more women when you've got Trudeau?
Yeah. And and so that's it. And I mean, he makes some incredible. He says, for instance, the pandemic is only demonstrating what we all know, that millennia of patriarchy have resulted in a male-dominated world with a male-dominated culture, which damages everyone. And of course, here's the one mention: women, men, girls and boys. So that's it. That even at a time of pandemic, we have to get the patriarchy in there, and we have to talk about male-dominated societies and how those damage everyone. And then he even goes on to say that the pandemic has shown, this one I think bothered me the most, though they're all outrageous. The pandemic has shown us who is doing the work that really matters. Nurses, teachers, care workers. As we recover, we need to remember this.
No mention of doctors.
No mention of doctors.
Or
firemen, policemen.
Yeah, truckers bringing us much needed supplies, the men that are keeping the electrical grid going, the men that are keeping the sewer system working, the men that make sure that we still have clean water to drink, the men that make sure that, we can still heat our homes or cool our homes as necessary. I mean, and I thought that was fascinating because he also claims in the same article that women, that the impact of job loss has been much greater on women, but all those supposedly, most important types of work, that's all government work. So those people and women do dominate in government work. And those are jobs that are very, very secure. Yeah. The people who have lost their jobs are predominantly men, the men who owned businesses.
Entrepreneurs.
The entrepreneurs. Yeah. Without which, we're really in big trouble in our society, and nobody gives a damn about the fact that many, many businesses are closing as a result of the pandemic. Well, they will eventually. Crazy. Yeah.
I fear in 2021 that we're going to get a real good picture of what happens when you undermine small business, which is big business across the board in the West. 2/3 of our businesses are small businesses.
Is that right? It's 2/3. I did not know that.
And they're under fire.
They really are, and have been for a long time.
Too bad it isn't mostly women in charge of small business, because they would be doing something about it and might save the economy.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
That is the truth. I mean, the section that got me the worst was when he talked about the second phase.
Oh, yes.
He says, the second phase of the response is mitigating the social and economic impact of this crisis. That starts with putting money into the hands of women who work in both the formal and informal economies. Cash transfers, credits, and loans should be targeted at women.
Wow.
What is the informal economy?
That would be caretaking, Paul.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that, you mean the supposed unpaid labor?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, that's what I'm guessing he's meaning.
Looking after children, looking after the elderly, the emotional labor that women supposedly do and such.
Oh, yeah, because we all know it's only women taking care of people in the home.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, that is astounding, isn't it? We're going to put money in women's hands.
Yes.
You can say it that baldly. Yeah.
He just says it outright. It's like,
where shall this money come from that we're going to put in women's hands?
Men.
Oh, my goodness, look. We have to take it from men who are supporting families.
Yeah.
Oh,
and other women with this money. Oh, well, too bad, guy. Give it up. We got to give it to a woman.
Yeah. We got to raise your taxes.
I mean, the gynocentrism is just astounding. Of how they're only looking at the needs of women and they completely ignore the needs of men.
Yeah.
It's astounding. It really is when you think about it.
Yeah.
This is that wonderful Maoist saying, women hold up half the sky. It came straight from Mao sometime around the time he murdered 70 million people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it goes.
Yeah, I mean, the kicker for me was when he says at one point that the UN has issued this policy brief calling on governments to take concrete action to put women and girls at the center of all efforts to tackle and recover from the pandemic. And then I think in the very next paragraph, although I'm not sure about this because I took out what I thought were the most egregious paragraphs and put them all together, but I think very shortly after that, he says, while statistics indicate that women and girls are at lower risk from the COVID-19 virus itself. They are suffering because of the redirection of health funding and services.
Yeah.
Wow, damn those men. They went and died. They went and got sicker than the women, and that meant that some health sources had to be redirected. How dare they?
That hurts women, Janice.
People don't eat up resources.
Yeah. Yeah, they should have just quietly died, and not ever had to go to hospital. I mean, we know that men are 80% of those who are admitted into emergency because they do tend to get a lot sicker from the virus. And so that is somehow now evidence of male culpability, because that has drained resources that women could have used for their reproductive health, as he goes on to say.
Yeah. I mean, we're living in a world where the filter we all look through is gynocentric. And you just look at it and you see the needs of women, but you do not see the needs of men. You just don't see it. And these articles are just an example of that filter, and people don't even miss it. People read that article, they don't even think about the men. They think, oh, those women, yes, good for them. They're helping the women,
Yeah. Yeah. And he basically says we've got to get more women into positions of power.
Right, that would solve everything.
Yeah, that'll solve it all. And then at the UN level and any, I guess, UN agency, he says right out he's going to institute quotas and temporary special measures to get women, 50% women into these various leadership roles. So he's laying out here a future vision, in which it's stated very clearly that from now till who knows when, everything is going to be about getting women into leadership positions, redirecting all resources towards women, putting women always at the center, taking men's money and putting it into women's hands. And men are literally second-class citizens in this vision. And their pain, their suffering, their troubles, their struggles are just not even on the radar.
Nope, not on the map.
And they wonder why MGTOW.
Yeah. Yeah.
What could possibly make men want to walk away from this system?
Yeah.
Duh.
I mean, it's really, wow. Yeah. And so now maybe should we transition to that last article, which
MGTOW.
Yeah, really.
Talking about MGTOW, yeah. This we'll have a link to the article, and I'll also supply a link to the actual judgment in this amazing, I was going to say divorce case, but it isn't a divorce case. This was a breakup of a relationship between a very wealthy Toronto multimillionaire whose name is Michael Latner. And he was together from 2001 to about 2015 with a beautiful woman named, Lisa Climans. And he wanted to marry her, according to the report. And but he did propose to her and she accepted, but he also wanted her to sign some kind of marriage contract about the division of his assets should the relationship dissolve. Smart man.
Wouldn't do it.
Yeah, she would not do it. So that tells us a lot about Miss Climans.
I wonder, was that the point that the relationship ended?
I wonder.
Used to sign the.
No, I don't think so. No, I as far as I could tell, I'm not sure though. But as far as I could tell, he brought. Well, maybe, but he brought forward multiple marriage contracts. Like he was really, he was committed to this relationship. He wanted to marry her and she must've been interested too. And so he brought forward various marriage contracts and she wouldn't sign them. It's not made clear in the article whether then, things fell apart. I mean, I would think that would damage the relationship in some way. It's got to introduce a lot of suspicion on the part of the man.
If a guy has, and I'm sorry to put it this way, but it's what I believe, if a guy has two brain cells to rub together, and she is totally averse to signing any kind of contract that has his interests in mind, then you should be running like hell right then. Mm-hmm. You should be gone. Of course,
probably wouldn't have helped Paul
any good because the Canadian courts are coming after him. And just curious, Janice, how much is this woman going to get?
It's unbelievable. So just to go back again, so they never married. They did not have children together. Each of them were coming from other broken marriages. They never lived together. They never lived together. The most they did was at his expense. They vacationed together in various places and in Florida every winter. So presumably staying at a place he paid for. And for part of every summer or some of the summers, they stayed at his cottage in Muskoka, which is a beautiful resort area north of Toronto. And but that was enough for the court to determine that essentially they were cohabiting, although they always maintained separate homes. Weird definition of cohabitation, right? They maintained separate homes, but they were considered to be cohabiting. They maintained separate bank accounts. They never had property in common. She just slept over at his places. He lavished her with gifts. He gave her a 7.5 carat diamond ring and all sorts of jewelry. He gave her own credit card that he paid for. He paid off her mortgage for her. I mean, he gave her thousands of dollars every month. And that, it seems, was his undoing. He was just too bloody generous to this woman who wasn't generous at all. She quit her job early on in the relationship. And then once the relationship ended, she refused to start up her life again and to be financial. I mean, how much money she must have had already as a result of the money he was giving her and the gifts and everything. Plus, she must have been getting support payments from her previous marriage. She had been married before. She had 2 children from this previous marriage. She must have been getting money from that source as well, I'm assuming, although that's not made clear in the articles that I read. But anyway, so the court ordered, initially the divorce court, a judge named Sharon Shore, ordered that she receive $53,000 per month. Forever.
10 years.
No, initially forever. And then he appealed it. That was back in 2019. That was the original ruling. He appealed it. And he said, look, we were, she was my girlfriend. She was not my spouse. We traveled together, and I gave her lots of gifts, but she was never my spouse. Didn't matter to the appeals court either, but the appeals court ruled that they hadn't been together quite long enough. She miscalculated, this woman did, I think. They hadn't been together quite long enough for him to be on the hook indefinitely. So the forever payments were reduced to only 10 years. So at the end of 10 years, Lisa Climans will have collected $6,360,000. Oops, sorry. $6,360,000 from her ex-boyfriend. And who knows how much money he had already given her through the course of their 14-year relationship.
And they wonder why MGTOW.
Yes. Exactly.
The Canadian government has just told all the male citizens of Canada that there is a target painted directly on your back if you enter any kind of relationship with a woman whatsoever.
Yep.
You are vulnerable to your assets being rifled through by the state and gathered up and handed over to somebody that you had fucking coffee with.
Yeah.
It's Jesus.
I know.
It's like, I don't know why men aren't pouring out of, well, the borders closed, I think, but because of COVID. But if I were Canadian, I'd leave the country before that, because they would certainly look at my relationship as a marriage, I guarantee you. And I'm fortunate that I've made the right calls in life, I think, to make sure that my relationship, which I love very, very much, is not subject to the state intervening. But this guy, they picked him up, slid a minefield underneath him, and set him back down and said, there you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
It's insane. He tried to protect himself. And, he's got 3 kids. He also has an ex-wife from his previous marriage. So who knows how much he was already paying her.
I was going to say, I wonder what he pays her.
Yeah. And he's got 3 kids that he wants to leave some money to. Presumably, that's what a lot of fathers want to do with their hard-earned money. They want to be able to leave a legacy to their children. And, why this woman deserves this? Like, I can't even think of it. Aren't we in the era of female power and independence? So
no, we are not. We are in the era of coerced dependence.
Yeah.
And they just call it female independence. That's a big fat lie. Women are not treated like independents with agency in either the United States or Canada or most anywhere else in the world. No. They're treated like children who cannot take care of themselves. And the moment that they stub their toe on something, you got to grab the nearest man, pin the blame on him, and make him fix it. That's the age that we're living in.
Yeah, that is it.
That sums it up pretty well, Paul.
It's it's stunning. It is really stunning. It really is. So there is no way a man can protect himself. I also saw an article not too long ago about a guy I'd never heard of before. Apologies, because I'm so ignorant about popular culture. He is a rapper or a hip hop artist. I'm not even sure if those are the same things or not. But his name is Dr. Dre. Do you guys know him?
I've heard of him.
Yeah.
I've heard of him a million times. I couldn't pick out one of his tunes.
Anyway, he's in the middle of a divorce as well. And his soon-to-be ex-wife, I guess, is claiming that he has a marriage contract or prenuptial agreement, whatever it's called. He has one. She's trying to have it nullified. He's also, of course, a multi-millionaire, maybe even a billionaire. She's trying to have it nullified by claiming that she felt pressured to sign it.
Ooh.
Yeah, and she has a great shot at winning at that, because it wouldn't be the first one. Also comes to mind Jeff Bezos' wife, who is now the 7th wealthiest person on the planet because of a divorce that netted her $40 billion.
What?
Oh,
yes.
Jeez, I didn't know that.
40 billion. I'm pretty sure.
Billion with a B.
Apparently, for about 6 months, she was an accountant when they were starting Amazon, and she helped with the upstart by being an accountant for about 6 months. And so I don't even want to do the math on 6 months of daily labor that equates to $40 billion, but that's an awful lot of pay for that. And of course, men like Bezos could care less. He's still like the richest guy on the planet.
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect him. But when you make $30,000, $40,000 a year, and they come in and take a sizable chunk income, you end up, if you're lucky, in a studio apartment, driving a piece of shit car, trying to make ends meet all the time.
Yeah, and maybe not even able to see your children because you don't have a good enough home to bring them to.
Yeah.
And sometimes because you don't even have the gas money to go get them. I mean, that's how a lot of the guys that show up in my email box saying, how do I, deal with this? And I've always got to tell them, sorry, nothing to do. Just, go to Sam's Club and get yourself big packages of ramen, stock your shelves, and prepare to dig in and survive because nobody's going to help you.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's incredible.
There's a lot of men out there like that.
Yes.
That's the
And
thing
no one
about
gives
this
a crap.
Michael Latner case. I mean, we don't have to cry too many tears for him, although I do feel outraged on his behalf, actually. But I mean, he's very, very, very wealthy, and he inherited a lot of his money. So, he obviously has had a life of ease, material ease, and I guess this won't kill him. But still, why should he have to pay this woman who doesn't want to be in his life anymore? And wouldn't agree to be in his life on terms that he felt comfortable with. So why does she need this money?
Gynocentrism.
But like you guys have both been saying, that isn't even really the issue. The issue is the precedent this sets, what it symbolizes about the direction that our courts continue to go in forcing men to support women that they've had any kind of romantic or sexual relationship with, of any sort at all, where the woman can claim that she's now owed something. Wow, it's scary stuff.
Canada now has legalized weed and legalized the financial rape of men at the same time.
Yeah.
So true.
So, yeah, I mean, men are, I think, completely justified now in protecting their assets in any way they can.
With extreme prejudice.
Yeah. I mean, I've met women who were just driven up the wall by the conviction that the husbands they were divorcing were hiding their assets. And I can now fully understand why those men might have taken the decision to do that.
Yes. And then there's all of the second wives who understand very well how he's been screwed.
Yeah.
Because they're suffering too.
I hear from them in my email too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a sad and tragic affair.
Yeah.
It looks like another, non-massage parlor style of happy ending for regarding men.
Yeah. I mean, men have got to protect their assets. They have to take the steps necessary, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to know even how to do that, since even marriage contracts don't necessarily stand up if the woman makes a claim that somehow she was coerced into signing it. So it's it's a crazy time.
It is crazy.
And even if she did, and you have women who were saying, I was coerced, I was forced to sign it, which is, of course, total bullshit. And then now in Canada, you have a woman who didn't sign it, still got it.
Yeah, still got it.
It's damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Gynocentrism runs silent and it runs deep.
Breathtaking. Well, are we finished for
We're
this?
depressed enough?
Dispiriting installment.
I would like to nominate Guterres for the PUTA.
Exactly.
That speech was the most bigoted thing I've seen since reading some of old translated Hitler speeches. Not kidding.
Yeah.
Not joking.
Yeah.
And it just absolutely, there's a link below, folks. Go read it for yourself. It is absolutely breathtaking in its hatred and bigotry and deceit all the way through, from the first word to the last word.
Yep. And most people will not see it. They
That's
can't
even more scary. Yeah.
It is scary. That's the scariest part.
And with that, I'm also going to plug a new group at Regarding Men. It starts this day, actually, which means by the time you see this, the group will have already transpired. But every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I am hosting a life goals group where men are invited to come in to name financial, work goals, any kind of goals they want for their health, anything like that, their plans and ambitions for life, and share those with other men and invite other men to hold their feet to the fire about achieving their goals. A great supportive way for men to identify and aim themselves toward what they want in life. And I'm really excited to be starting that group. That's 3 p.m. Eastern.
And it will be every Tuesday from here on out.
Absolutely.
And keep in mind, this is one group out of lots of different groups we have going. So
there's a bunch of them. And
Janice does one on Thursday
had a
evening.
couple of moments of confusion on the group. Sorry, guys. We're just getting our wings here, but we're getting it ironed out.
Guilty. My fault, guys.
Me too.
Largely my fault.
The larger part was mine.
We'll get there.
Actually, it was Janice. Janice screwed everything up. What was I saying?
So I guess we will end by saying that
Men
are
good.
Hey.
How about that? We did it right. All right, guys.
Okay.
It's good to be with you.
Have a good one.
Next week.
All right. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.